Hi, welcome to Sociology. We're going to be looking at socialization. And in this chapter, we're going to explore this as a process by which we learn how it is or who we are as a person, how we behave, what skills do we need to know to be successful and to survive in the society and the culture in which we live. And we're going to look at the process of socialization. This doesn't happen like you get into an introductory booklet that you need to review and become familiar with your society and cultural expectations. But it's actually done in both formal and informal. The formal means that there's times when we actually sit down and learn certain things, not necessarily specifically about culture, but the process by which we go through school, for example, is very much preparing us for some of the cultural expectations. What we learn from our families has a big role. So the informal is probably what we're most influenced by, and that is the non-sit down and learn and read parts of our socialization. These are the things that happen on an everyday, ongoing basis. There's no sit-down class for it. It's just the way that we're parented. It's just the way that we're exposed to other people. It's the way that media influences. All of this can be done informally. So this week we're going to define socialization. We're going to look at why is socialization important and what are the important aspects that influence our socialization. So what we're going to do this week is socialization. Let's get on to it. So define socialization. Well, it's the lifelong process of social interaction through which individuals acquire a self-identity and the physical, mental, and social skills needed for survival in a society. So what are the consequences to children of isolation or physical abuse as contrasted with the social interaction and parental affection? You'll see this in your textbook, just looking at the initial components of the role and significance of parental abuse, or more importantly, in terms of the role of socialization, the role of family, and the role of society to positively influence the lives of children as they grow older to become part of the larger society. And so essentially, when children are getting their needs met through affection, warmth, and closeness, they tend to see the world as a safe, comfortable place with trustworthy people in it. Children who are exposed to less adequate care and are not emotionally supported, well, they tend to feel rejected and abused, will often see the world as hostile and something to be fearful of. This is really putting a fine point on the importance of social relationships that we're exposed to and what we learn about the world and ourselves. And so this is important from a sociological perspective of the role of family in particular, but not exclusively, to provide its youngest citizens with the best that it can provide and the most warmth and caring it can provide and the most reasonable access to skills and attributes to be the best people they can be in any given society. So sociologists emphasize that the social environment is crucial in terms of being part of an individual's socialization. It's essential for the individual's survival and growth. The better your socialization, the better the care and the welfare that you receive, the better that is for your survival and growth. It's essential for the survival and stability of the society. The better the socialization of our youngest, and the more warmth and caring and affection that they are given in the most positive direction, is only going to help society better. Its content varies from culture to culture. Socialization in North America, or more specifically in Ontario, is different than the socialization that might occur in other parts of Europe, in Australia, in Africa, in South America. And what we believe about ourselves, what we believe about our society, and the world is largely a product of our interactions with other people. So that's how come socialization is so important. One, it's through the interactions of other people that we are socialized. And that becomes very important in terms of just not only how we navigate the world around us in our immediate world, but also how we see the other people in the world around us as well. So let's begin with an exploration into what are the influences of socialization. We're going to call them the agents of socialization. Agents of socialization are all the people, the groups, or institutions that teach us what we need to know to participate in society. Now, you're going to find that I'm going to explore a few more than are actually in your textbook, but I'm just going to briefly highlight them because they are more emerging elements of socialization agents. Now, the first one, and probably the primary and most important for children, is family. The most important agent for children is family. Family is variable. Now, what I mean by variable is that family is not unique and the same for everybody. There are intact families, single-parented families, same-sexed families. Family types are more variable than they've ever been. That doesn't make one better than another. It just means that family is important no matter the form that it takes. Our initial concept of self, our language, our beliefs, our social class, ethnic background, geography. Geography plays a role in our socialization. If you've been born and raised in a rural area compared to an urban area, what you know about the world and how you sort of see the world could vary dramatically. Whether you're from the East Coast, the West Coast, these are all transmitted through our family. All these concepts are transmitted informally through our family. That just means we don't sit down with our family and have a lesson on culture, but how my family supports me, how they reinforce behaviors that I exhibit or punish for behaviors I exhibit, all helps shape who I become as a person and what they value as a family and what they communicate to me is right and wrong in our society, good and bad, desirable and undesirable. Now, the functionalists will indicate that family, that is one of the primary functions, and one of the primary functions of family is the emotional support. They provide security, acceptance, closeness, love. This is one of the main functions of an institution or a structure, as I've mentioned before, of a society structure. That's one of the functions. That socialization is also bi-directional. That just means that when I'm receiving socialization, I'm also giving it, emitting it. So when I give feedback to my parents and they've told me something that I've done, it's that dialogue back and forth that becomes bi-directional, and it's known as reciprocal socialization. Now we're going to look at another one. Family is first and foremost, but it's not the only agent, and it's not even the only agent that has a profound impact on us. We can also look at school. Now, daycare, elementary school is where where many of our needs start to become aware that we are not the only young person on earth, and that our needs don't override the needs of the whole. The classroom becomes an important element, not just me as an individual. The identity our identity. Sorry, I'm backing up a bit. When we look at what the role can be, well, school prepares us for adult life. Functionalists see schools as having several functions. One, that school is a socialization agent. It's training us for our culture. It provides social control, and it creates placement in society. Now, by contrast, conflict theorists, they point out that to a different experience where students have based on their social class, their ethnic background, and neighborhood and gender, they identify with what's called, this is the term that's brought up by the conflict theorist, as the hidden curriculum. That the hidden curriculum, that teaches children about the value of competition. It teaches children about materialism, and that work instead of play is important. Obedience to authority is important. Thus, socializing children for the workforce where they need to know what their place is, rather than for their own well-being. Now, school is important. It introduces us to, like I mentioned, we're not the first and foremost in the minds of the school, that we have to start to recognize we are one of many. We start to understand that there are rules and we need to abide by those rules. It doesn't mean that we don't have pushback and can make some changes, but there's methods and routes by which those changes can happen. So it's a very significant continuation of socialization. Family is still involved. School becomes an alternative and a significant agent for socialization for the bigger picture of how we will survive in society and how we get directed to where our future will lead us to. Now, of course, we also know that there's more to socialization agents than family and school. There's another important one that sometimes carries throughout our life, and that's our peers. Now, the greatest influence about peers is in early adolescence and forward. Now, these are people who share common interests and social interests to us, a sense of belonging, a sense of worth, and a large part of our socialization is through the peer influence. Now, peers enable us to explore ourselves separately from our family. It's where we can spread our wings and sort of try out things that we may not want to try out with our family to find out whether they fit well and whether they are who we are or not. We become more aware of what conforming means and the risks of not conforming, the good and bad of that. There's times when conforming is appropriate and good and we get reinforced by that, and there's times when not conforming are just as valued and just as good, and learning that that's okay if we don't get reinforced. All of which helps us in our cultural socialization. Now, peer groups are the first place, aside from family, I guess, where we recognize that people outside of our family can become long-time friends and relationships to us. And so we start to see that relationships that are not family can also be enduring. Now, another big one, which is certainly brought up in your textbook, but wasn't as big 50 years ago, is another socialization agent that has really been able to introduce itself, particularly in the last 25 years since the advent of the internet, and that is the mass media. Now, mass media, it reflects every aspect of society, not necessarily accurately, and it affects children, teens, and adults. It can be in print, web-based, radio, TV, social media, news, magazines. It's everywhere. Now, some of the issues that it introduces for us. It informs us about events. We are exposed, introduced to a wide range of people, and have access to many varied and variable viewpoints and issues. We get exposed to commercialism, entertain, a huge influence over many hours exposed to media. It's varied in terms of its positive and negative images of all manners of issues, from people, men and women, ideas, perspective. Knowing how to wade through and critically think our way through to a more useful and more meaningful outcomes is very difficult when it comes to mass media. And we certainly see this more if you've been tracking what's been going on in the United States, and particularly with Donald Trump as president. What's real, what's not real, the vast amounts of what has been labeled as fake news, both in terms of what he's labeled as fake news and what media labels as fake news, and the number of people who create the fake news and put it out there. So media has a huge impact. And in terms of what we choose to watch, read, and pay attention to can influence our socialization and what we think is right and wrong, good and bad, desirable and undesirable. Now, the next few I'm going to review here with you are ones that are not in your textbook, but they become important because of the role they play in many of our lives, some more than others, but they start to have a big impact. One is religion. This particular agent can influence a number of things, from what we see as influences our morality, it influences our beliefs and how we see other people, and of course choices that we make and how we treat others and how we see others. Religion isn't something that everybody participates in the same area of religion or the same type of religion, and not even with religion at the same amount. And so it just seems that it's not something we can put up with the other four, because it's not something that everyone participates in. and not everyone participates in the same form of religion. But it does have a big impact on terms of decisions that we make, how we interact with people, and how we see other people in the world around us. Now, on top of that, this one is really one that you may not have thought about if you were thinking about agents yourself, but this one has a big impact, and that is sports. It really introduced, because a lot of people in Canada in particular have engaged in different sports, hockey, baseball, soccer, football perhaps, a number of different sports, and it introduced the concept of team. It also influenced us in terms of the people that we were associated with. But on top of that, if we look at the role sports play in our lives, it could influence the things that we purchase, how we align ourselves with different teams or different players, but also in terms of the purchasing power. If you look at the sort of amount of revenue produced by professional sports team in that bottom image, the NFL is a $13 billion a year sports industry. Now that's generally TV revenue, sports memorabilia, t-shirts, hats, you name it, they're selling it and we're purchasing it. And that has a lot to do with, how we're socialized in terms of what we value. We spend money on things that we value, and sports teams are something we spend a lot of money on. If you've ever bought a ticket for the Raptors or the Blue Jays or the Toronto Maple Leafs, you know that that's not a cheap event, and that the cost of all the things associated with it can be pretty dear. But if we spend our money on it, there's something about what it does for us that we value that teaches us something about who we are and how we interact with our society. Now the last agent is one you probably would have thought of, and that is the workplace. The workplace, again, we look at the concept of team, we look at friendships, some of them lifetime. It's a place that we spend a great deal of our time in our adult life, and we've aligned ourselves with a particular work philosophy or identity when we take a job and we work in that field. Some of the people we associate with, some of the beliefs that we start to articulate are based on our workplace, and these will impact our socialization. And some of this, and we'll get into it in the next, in part 2, will be looking at things like how we learn and re-socialize. We might learn a certain way of thinking, but because of the role we play in the workplace or in society, we may re-socialize. If you've been in prison and you come out, you're getting re-socialized to fit into society. If you are a young person who goes and follows a career that requires you to have a specific philosophy and belief that might be different than the one you were raised with, policing is an example, then you might go through a re-socialization as well. In addition, not to as an agent of socialization, but as a very big part of our socialization experience is gender socialization. And if you look at all those agents that we have on the screen there, and starting with family, teaching us how to behave as a male or how to behave as a female, how to dress, talk, behave, and attitudes, you can go around to those different highlighted points on the screen and say, well, how did school affect who I learned to be as male or female, masculinity and femininity? How did my peers affect me? What role did mass media play? Did religion play a role? Has sport played any role in that? How about my workplace? So when we think in terms of agents of socialization and the role of socialization, it's a very comprehensive and big topic. It isn't something that is just simply, here's your manual, read through the manual and exhibit these behaviors and you'll be fine in our society. This is a lifelong process of socialization, and it doesn't end until we actually pass on, and then maybe our socialization stops. All right, everybody, that's part 1. Keep up the good work, and let's move on. Bye now.